Welcome, everyone. So glad you could spend the next hour with us going over the State of DevOps report. We're really excited for today's agenda and conversation. And with that being said, I will quickly go into introductions. So my name is Josh Moore. I'm today's host and MC. Outside of that, I have the privilege of being in our cloud strategy, tech transformation, application modernization space within Deloitte Consulting. I also have the opportunity of leading all of our eminence and thought leadership for Agile and DevOps. So the opportunity to be able to lead things like this. And today I'm joined by Amanda, Christopher, and Eddy. So I'll turn it over to Amanda for a brief introduction.
Hello, I'm Amanda Lewis. I'm a developer relations engineer at Google Cloud. And specifically, I'm an advocate for the DORA research, and I sit on the DORA advocacy team. Part of my role is being the lead and co-founder of the DORA community of practice. So I get to spend a lot of time with, people like Josh and Eddy and Christopher and everyone here today, really talking about how we get better at software delivery. So I'll pass it over to Christopher.
I like how Amanda teed that off for me. Get better at software delivery. Hi, everybody. My name is Christopher Linde. I work with Eddy and Josh, and I have the privilege of working with Amanda. My role at Deloitte is serve as one of the leaders with Eddy in what our practice called modern delivery. It's now modern engineering. We focus primarily on doing things better, building software better. Agile not in the space of theory, but actually applying Agile techniques. Coupling Agile hand in hand with DevOps, bringing SRE and observability to the forefront to ensure that what we're building hardens and grows with the organization. So I look forward to talking to you over the next hour. Thanks.
Yes, and I am Eddy Krumholz. Thank you so much for the invitation. Always a pleasure to get involved with this panel. This is, I think, my fourth or fifth. I don't remember anymore, but it's always fun. I'm a technology fellow with the firm. I'm the CTO for the Modern Software Engineering practice, working with Josh and Christopher and others. And looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much. All right, so just a quick agenda and housekeeping before we dive into today's conversation. So we're spending the first few minutes welcome and introductions. Next, we're going to hand it over to Amanda, who's going to share a brief summary of this year's Accelerate State of DevOps report, some of the key takeaways and insights. And then the bulk of today's conversation is going to be a discussion where we're going to be deep diving into 3 specific topics. And we're going to allow Amanda to share the Google Cloud point of view and some of the key findings from the State of DevOps report. And then Christopher and Eddy will be responding with our Deloitte perspective on those topics. And there's going to be a lively conversation on those 3 topics as well. And then the last thing, and probably the most important thing for you all, is we will be spending 10 minutes with live Q&A at the end. So please use the Q&A feature for all questions. I'll be fielding those. Some of those we'll be able to answer as we go through the topics. Others we'll put in the chat, but ones that maybe are a little bit lengthier, we'll try to cover in the last 10 minutes. And then, as you heard at the beginning of the call, today's webinar is being recorded. And then also, we'd love for you all to get in touch with us. We're going to have a slide at the end with our personal contact. But if you're just interested in learning more about Deloitte's Agile and DevOps practice, some of our thought leadership and eminence, please reach out to that very long Deloitte email, US Modern Engineering Eminence at Deloitte.com, and we'd love to engage with you. All right, so with that being said, I'll pass it over to Amanda to talk about the executive summary of the State of DevOps 2023 report.
Awesome, thank you, Josh. And, thank you, a special thank you to Deloitte for your continued support of the research program and the annual State of DevOps report, and everyone here and that participated in the survey, because without the participants taking the annual survey, we wouldn't be able to be here today having this, did you say lively, I think, Josh, conversation we're going to have back and forth. But this is, the 9th State of DevOps report. And the research program is now, the data has come from over 36,000 professionals around the world. And so we're able to be running the largest and longest running research project of its kind, really looking into how software teams get better at getting better, as Christopher mentioned, right? We're getting better at software delivery, and how do we do that? And I look forward today to kind of, I'll share some of these, kind of the executive summary, but really hearing from, Eddy and Christopher on how teams are doing that they're working with at Deloitte, because that is really what the research is about. This is taking kind of all of us collaborating and gathering it together to see how do we work better at getting better. And so what did we look at this year? Well, we're diving deep on how our teams, especially high performing teams, how are they utilizing the technical, process, and culture capabilities? And we're looking at specific outcomes. 3, we're looking at how that impacts organizational performance, team performance, and employee well-being. So there's a lot of things we could research, and I've been involved in the research program kind of hands-on for 4 years, been a huge fan of Dora for 10, but this year was the first year that I was an author, and it is quite an experience to figure out what are we going to dig into, what are we going to look into, and creating a survey that people can complete that doesn't take them a week to do. And so this year specifically, we looked at 5 technical capabilities. We dug into artificial intelligence, AI. That's probably not a surprise to anyone. I think anywhere you are today, if you don't say AI, you're not going to win the bingo game. But then we also looked at chunk-based development, loosely coupled architecture, continuous integration, and rapid code review. Some of the things, those technical capabilities we've been looking at for a long time, like chunk-based development. And, Dave Farley, if you haven't read the report yet, I encourage you to kind of read where he talks about continuous delivery and why that's important, and the importance of being able to keep our software in a releasable state. I think sometimes when we think about continuous delivery, or when we look at how some teams are able to deliver daily, we think, oh, well, my user would not like that. They don't want me to deliver new features to them on a regular basis like that. I think what we need to remember is it's not always about being able to release new features daily, but it's being able to have our software in a releasable state. So the thing that we find year after year, and we found it again this year, right, is that teams that are working in small batches, they're reducing their opportunities for conflict, and that's ensuring that they're able to, on each commit, the software has automated tests that are triggered. They're providing fast feedback to their developers. And so one of the other really big things that came out of this year's report is this idea of user centrism, right? That when we're focused on the user, we have better software delivery performance, better organizational performance. And a really key part of that is when we're doing that, it gives our teams the ability to prioritize and act with high quality, fast feedback. And that ends up that we are able to deliver better software. A key part of the findings year over year is the role of leadership, right? Transformational leadership. And this comes in a lot of different ways. Part of it is creating an environment where our teams can really work blamelessly. We can, uncover things that need to be improved, and we can go after it as a team and not really be pointing fingers. We don't want to have finger pointiness, right? And that we actually can learn together and really give voice to our team members to be able to use the data that we have to drive improvement. So out of the research program, we found the ability to measure software delivery performance. And we do that with the 4 key metrics. We're looking at your change lead time, your deployment frequency, the time, your failed deployment recovery time, and then also the percentage of the times that you fail. When we look at that, those numbers should be used for us to have conversations on how we can improve. And those really should just be a benchmark. We shouldn't be using those to say, oh, you're not doing well. Oh, you're doing great. It really should be at the practitioner level that this is enabling us to identify how can we improve. The other thing that we've been looking at the last couple of years is about reliability. And I think that, if we look at how DevOps got started and when we were looking at kind of bringing the developers and the operators together, at times there's this fear, like how can we move fast and stay stable? And we were maybe oftentimes being a little more reactive on that operation side, where when we're really embracing the practice of reliability, we're being proactive. We're creating a healthy environment within our teams that allows us to be able to have reliable software, but also reliable teams that are happy and have good well-being. There's a great part in the report that I encourage you to read about fostering a culture of belonging by Dr. Jeffrey Weiner. I think this is another thing that we're seeing, not just in the annual State of DevOps report, but really out in the community, talking about how do we help all of our team members really be, an integral part of our team, that we're enabling them to help us all be more successful together. And, another thing that we found in the report that I think is interesting when we look at people getting started is that when you're bringing on someone new to your team, things that help encourage that success to happen faster, because we're seeing that it really takes sometimes about a year before our new hires are, able to really truly be productive, is that when you have high quality documentation in place, when they're able to work together with members of the team, so maybe doing some, peer review or peer programming. And then we've also seen interesting when we're looking at the artificial intelligence using AI, that's actually seems to be helping those that are a little bit less experienced to be more successful than it is we're seeing those that have higher levels of experience. So when we say we dug into AI, what were we looking at? We specifically, and I should point out, when we use the word team means a lot of different things to people, and you can sometimes be on multiple teams. We're really talking about the application or service that you're working on. And so a team that's working on an application or service is going to be in different roles. You're going to have engineers, you're going to have QA, you're going to have operators, you're going to have product managers. And so we're really talking about that team that delivers the software, not necessarily kind of the team that you feel you report to on a daily basis. So we asked this question: for the primary application or service you work on, how important is the role of AI in contributing to each of the following tasks? And as you see here, what we found is that it's starting to do that. There is some adoption of it, and it is starting to impact it, but there's definitely room for growth, and we're really just getting started. And this just kind of shows this even more. I think, if you, like I said, it was kind of like the bingo game as everybody is saying AI, but I also think that it is early, and some of the solutions and tooling that's coming out, it's new. And so as developers, we're excited, we're playing around with it, we're trying to figure it out. But from an organizational standpoint, there's a lot of complexity into implementing it and kind of the process for it and how it will be used. And so the report definitely saw that come through, is that there's some adoption, we're playing around with it, but it's still really being incorporated into our processes. And Eddy, what are your thoughts on that, and what are you seeing when it comes to AI?
Yeah, thank you. Every conversation that we engage with clients, I guess for the last 6 months at least, the topic of AI is pervasive, right? Everybody is looking at AI, and AI is going to permeate pretty much every aspect of our technology lives, right? Especially when it comes to software development. And there is an underlying topic or a theme that you can see when it comes to adoption, and it is the topic of trust and reliability, or that trust in the system from an ethical perspective, from a bias or non-biased perspective, from a risk and security perspective, and of course what people see is like how do you massage the data and how do you make this smarter, right? But all this is going to take time. Today, AI is really being used as a way to augment what humans currently do, right? It's just doing it faster or doing it a little bit with better accuracy. So it's not doing it for us, it's doing it with us, right? Which is a very important aspect of it. So as you can see, there are some initial inroads, if you may, around project requirements, where you reduce the time on reviewing them and making sure that the code has better quality. I mean, code quality or code generation has been around for many years, right? The problem is that it has been highly inaccurate. But now even within Deloitte, we have accelerators like one called TurboCode that allows us to do things like that. Testing and deployment, you know, and the idea of recovering from failures faster is really where we are today, right? So to me, the most important part, I think, to bring back is, you know, why this matters, and you can see some metrics here from CIOs where they want higher efficiencies, they want higher automation, they want more operational cost gains. I will tell you that everything it wraps around something that I will coin more around engineering excellence. So is how do you maximize the value, the business value generated from money that you spend or that CIO spend on product development by continuously improving the software delivery process. So what AI is intended to do from my perspective and my angle is, how can AI improve that software delivery process? How can we make it more trustworthy, not only from the data perspective, but also from all these other aspects that I mentioned? And I think that will help in not only adoption, but also progression, which we feel is going to be, you know, pretty rapid within the next 4 years.
Yes, I have to agree. I think, you know, there is, you know, sometimes maybe a fear about replacing us, but I think we see it in the research as well, that it is about, you know, improving our ability to complete these tasks. And we see in the technical capabilities that as we can get better at those, we get better at software delivery. So I think it will be really interesting for us to continue to look at this and measure it and see how we're kind of adopting these practices and how it's impacting our software delivery. So, you know, encouraging teams, if you're measuring your 4 key metrics, as you start using one of these toolings, you know, keep an eye on how your metrics are doing and have discussions around that to see, is it helping us get better? If it's not helping us get better, why might that be? And there could be a variety of reasons, right, that contribute to that.
Yep.
So,
Agreed.
yeah, thanks. Josh, if you want to head to the next slide. So, you know, as I said, the fundamental kind of big thing that came out of our research has been this ability to measure software delivery performance with those 4 key metrics. And each year we do this cluster analysis to see, you know, what is possible, how are teams performing? And, you know, a highlight this year, depending on who you are, thinks, oh my gosh, the elite teams are back, because last year when we did the cluster analysis, it ended up being that there were 3 clusters, not 4. And each year that kind of changes just dependent on how teams are working. And so again, this year, you know, we've got 4 categories: the low, medium, high, and elite. And what's important is not the label. And I encourage you to not focus on, let's go be the elite team, but really be thinking about how, you know, how will this help us improve? So if we, you know, if our change lead time, it's possible, we're seeing there are teams, right, that are able to deploy, you know, their change lead time, they deploy on demand and their change lead time is less than a day. So this is possible, and they can do that so they can move fast and still be stable. They've got a 5% change fail rate, and when something does happen, they're able to recover in it in less than an hour. And, you know, what's also very important when we look at this, so we want to be striving, we know that this is possible. If we are looking at ourselves and we are falling in that lower tier, we can use the research to improve, and maybe, you know, in 3 months, 6 months, we're going to be in medium, maybe we'll get to high, and maybe it'll never make sense for our application to actually be in that elite category, but it would be important for our application to be able to always be in a releasable state. And the key thing to always remember here is it is not useful to compare application teams against each other. So if one of your application teams are falling in the elite category and one is falling in the low category, there is a lot of context around those applications that doesn't make it, you're comparing apples to oranges. You really can't use that as kind of how a team or how teams are doing against each other. There could be some interesting things on if you have an elite team and you have a team that's a low performer, helping them communicate to one another and share their practices and identify, what's maybe holding one team back and not another. Also looking at, the ability to improve. So over time, if you have teams, you might have a low team that has been improving their scores with the 4 key metrics, 10%, 20%. That is super awesome, even if they're not in that elite category, because they are improving the value they're delivering to your users. And as you see here on the bottom, and this was kind of a key part that I contributed to this year's report, was looking into faster code reviews. And it is kind of astounding, but maybe at times it feels not surprising that, those teams that have faster code reviews have 50% higher software delivery performance. And I guess that makes sense, right? If we can get it out there faster, it seems like obviously we would be able to deliver it faster. That isn't always true, right? Because, maybe if you're already doing well at code reviews and you can get it reviewed fast, but then there's a bottleneck. Maybe your team only releases monthly currently. Well, then speeding up that code review might not make sense. But those teams that are able to do that and able to get it to flow through the system, we're seeing how this improves software delivery performance. And I think as I dug in, and there's a lot of interesting research that has been done around this modern code review process, is that sometimes we think about, it's of course, faster code review, but we're not thinking about what contributes to being able to do a faster code review. How, when, the teams that are doing this often, they're doing peer reviews, they're doing peer programming, they're working in smaller batches. So when someone is reviewing their code, it's a lot easier for them to understand it. They're working in usually loosely coupled teams where the people that are reviewing the code have a better understanding of the context of the code they're reviewing. And ultimately what's happening with that is that you've got this knowledge transfer that's happening. You've got kind of shared ownership of code, and there's a lot of transparency that comes with that. So the teams that have these efficient code review processes, they're actually kind of combining several of the capabilities we've found over the years in the research that then leads to being able to review code faster.
This is a critical slide. When we work with clients and we the mysterious word agile transformation, DevOps transformation, I would look at this slide differently. I would take off the low, medium, high, and elite, and I would call those maturity levels. And I would take this, and this is yours, and self-score. And then look at goals. So if I started out, for example, change lead time, and I was low, I would say low means maturity level 1, between 1 week to a month. What are the things that I need to move to medium or level 2 to get to between 1 week and 1 month? Not between 1 week and a month to less than a day. That is not achievable. If you look at this as phase gates and then handle your own transformations to go, as a team, what are the things I need to do to go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and then to 4? You're going to find that this is very, very useful information. I just wanted to throw that in there, Amanda. This is an amazing slide. It's a roadmap.
Thank you, Chris. I agree. Although I will say, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, who started the research program, she's real funny about not using that word maturity. But I agree with you. It's this, this path we're on that and labels are hard. So if we say low, it feels kind of but if we're like, we've hit gate 1, like if you're a gamer, I guess, like, or if you're like Mario Kart, when you like get the spinner, it's like, all right, I got to 1. What will it take to get to 2? And ultimately, we can't boil the ocean. We can't go from between 1 week and 1 month to less than a day. It's just like not possible. And so, Chris, I really love kind of that mentality of how to look at that and kind of slowly progress through those different categories. All right. So the next thing that we did, so we're doing this cluster analysis, and we've for years done what we were just looking on the last slide. But this year, we also took a look at how kind of the predictiveness with different performance. So looking at if you're a user-centric team, if you're a feature-driven team, if you're developing, or you're balanced. And what we're meaning by that is that, a user-centric team is super focused on the user. Everything they're doing is, they're getting that fast user feedback, and they have kind of honed in on the work that they're doing is looking specifically at the user. On the feature-driven side, these teams, they are focused on features. They are a feature factory. They are getting out the features, not necessarily the features their users want, but they are delivering features. In that developing category, this we've kind of got some hypothesis about, but probably here, this is an application that is relatively new, still kind of coming into market and really identifying who their users are and what their users need. And then we have the balance team. And this is the team that is both, prioritizing that user feedback and getting that and enabling their developers to integrate that on a regular basis while delivering useful features to the user, but keeping the well-being of the team. So what you're seeing here is if I'm a feature-driven team, if we're looking on the bottom kind of left side here, if I'm a feature-driven team, it's predictive of more burnout. When I'm in that developing mode, also predictive of more burnout. But the teams that are focused on the user solely, that user-centric, or they're in that balance state, they've got less burnout. In the same way, when we look at over on job satisfaction, right, those developing and balanced teams and the user-centric teams, they are a lot happier. They're going to stick around. They want to be a part of your team. Those feature-driven teams, not as much, right? They're not as happy. And it ultimately, if you go up then over to team performance, it's predictive of less team performance. And feature-driven is also really less predictive of good organizational performance.
Let's talk about those different groupings of respondents. There's some common denominators there. Let's talk about what accelerates people to move to high and to elite, as we saw in the previous slides. Well, things like hybrid and multi-cloud, we're seeing that more and more. We have found with our clients, when we start trying to force fit cloud or on-prem as a solution as the end state solution versus looking at the architecture, looking at the user instantiation, having a user-centric view of what's required, and then looking at the topology of your infrastructure and going there and then aligning your teams there. When we see that, that's what's good. When we see clients go cloud or cloud averse and go hard in the paint on one or the other, it's hard to react to when technology layers are driving or technology aspects are driving strategy. So we have found having a gradual path and taking into consideration all the dimensions proves for teams that are going to be higher, they're going to achieve a higher success rate. DevSecOps and SRE. I'm a bit of an SRE fanatic. The idea of hardening and solutioning from within in combination with your delivery teams. Don't know why it took us this long to get there. A lot of it, I know a little bit. A lot of it is the tooling capability and frankly, the evolution of skill sets. When you see things like Agile that bring the operations side of the house and the development closer together, it's inevitable. But that is a force multiplier. On-demand self-service and self-healing infrastructures, that goes hand to hand with SRE. When you have infrastructures that remove the rigid boundaries, we talked about that with evolving infrastructures with hybrid and multi-cloud, letting things evolve, it allows your internal capabilities to have a lay of the land using things like observability to understand where everything is. You start doing chaos engineering, intentionally trying to break things to heal. So we like seeing that a lot. Reusable assets. Oh my gosh. Unicorns drive me crazy. We should be able to see something over and over and over again and evolve it. It means we're being smart. We're maximizing what Eddy talked about earlier, which is where are we spending our dollars? If everything is a unique solution, a couple things are going to happen. You're going to burn everybody out. You're probably going to have an architecture that's pretty feeble. And you're going to be missing a lot of the trends that are happening in industry. So Reuse, reuse, reuse. That's the name of the game. Paradigm shifts. You'd be amazed at how much resistance there is in all of our clients to paradigm shifts. The clients where we see the most success are those that look at 2-year iterations of something. This will only last 2 years. Let's not go heavy in on any aspect. Let's experiment and adapt. Let's experiment and adapt. Those kind of organizations that focus on continuous improvement succeed. But I will say it's not a binary thing. There is a healthy balance. You can focus too much on being on the bleeding edge, and then that's a problem too. So it's really organization by organization, industry by industry, finding where you lie on that line. Let's talk about challenges for medium and low segments. As I said, the rush to cloud platform could be a problem. Also resistance to cloud. There are some things that just make sense. Cloud native, it's been around for a while. Containerization, and there's a big movement to look at cloud, but the aspects that are required, the dimensions that are required to look at cloud are very financial. You don't want to go all in. You want to do your homework, understand what your cost envelopes are, and make educated decisions about what you're pushing there. So low adoption to medium adoption. Low adoption is not good. All in to cloud is not good. Somewhere in the middle we like to see. Security late in the conversation. I'm laughing because I was just on a call this morning where we're about to do a major push, and we'd advised the client several times, and now we're in the 11th hour, and information security has come to actually talk to us versus giving us a checklist. Never operate from a checklist. It's conversation and involvement over and over and over again. That will be a significant delay. Availability and reliability. That goes hand in hand with resiliency, right? If I have a system that I'm building and it requires 99.999 Six Sigma, all the nines on the end, and somewhere in that chain of architecture, I've got someone that has an SLI or SLO at 50%, it's not going to work. It's going to break. We're seeing that a lot right now. We're seeing that a lot, especially in some of the more traditional sectors like insurance or financial. So that has to be an early conversation and a continuous one, right? If we're using agile principles to develop things and we're using DevOps, we're evolving. Well, we need to also make sure we're evolving those conversations. And then lastly, fear. It says stuck here, fear related to legacy architectures and processes. Those shops that have mainframes now, we're in lots of conversations, and the mainframe is this dusty, mysterious box that has lights on in the basement and no one wants to touch it. Well, we got to touch it. We got to figure out how to touch it. And we touch it by demystifying what's going on there. There's lots of tools. Again, I said observability. There are a lot of tools now that will demystify what's happening in a mainframe and will show you end to end what's happening. We need to use those. We need to obsolesce processes that are taking too long and they're there just for the sake of being there. There's a term that I use with my teams. For the sake of what? For the sake of what should be the starting point to any conversation. And then if you do that, and then you look at the process, and if you're constantly doing that, and you look at the process, you're going to find ways to improve it. So address that. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Eddy to talk about the next slide.
If I can just jump in real quick before we move on for that, a couple thoughts, and I love that. Was it for the what? Is that what it exactly? Because I want to write down what you said. For the sake of what?
For the sake of what?
For the sake of what? I love that. And I think so often, if we think about why has SRE adoption been slower, or why have some teams struggled to use the cloud, even cloud native teams struggling with that, is kind of, I think, the combination of two things you said. One, for the sake of what, we're not stopping and thinking about that. And we're seeing that through the research, that those teams that are kind of that user focused are understanding the value their application or service is bringing to the business, but also fear. Fear is real and it's hard. And we have fear of trying new things, doing something different. What if it fails? And this, I think, where we see from a leadership perspective, the ability, as we work with teams to help guide and give them that space to do something small, so maybe they can have that win and then see really the benefits that all of these different practices, SRE, cloud, can really bring to the team without making it super scary. Eddy?
Yes, I totally agree with you guys. I think that to talk about resiliency or reliability, I think we need to put a little bit of context to that, right? Before we outline the benefits. From our perspective, from the Deloitte perspective, when we talk about reliability and resiliency, we really talk about at least 5 different areas, right? One is around architecture and governance, where you build and track and enforce architectural patterns, and you have reliability principles, and basically have a resiliency first culture, right? That's kind of one of them. The other one is around SRE enablement, which Christopher touched briefly around, where we look at reliability engineering around SDLC and operations. The area of observability, which Christopher also mentioned here, to do more like an integrated telemetry and instrumentation of systems, infrastructure, and applications, as well as resiliency testing, where we spend time doing hardening of applications and things like that. Now, this is encompassed by this idea of always on enterprise, right? Which in a way kind of ups a little bit the ante, and because you need to enable things like high availability architecture and things like disaster recovery, right? From our perspective, really there are 3 areas that we focus on, or what we will call pillars of resiliency, right? Which we will divide in basically operational excellence, where we look at things like monitoring and observability, notifications, configuration management, and traceability. The other one is around reliability and high availability, where we look at how easy it is to recover from runtime failures, the ability to contain effects of certain failures, or the ability to perform runtime failure model testing, which also Christopher alluded a little bit to. And lastly, this idea of performance efficiency, right? Which enables things like auto-scaling, response times, and other things like data replication and data consistency. Right now, of course, the benefits can be a little bit better understood, right? The benefits of implementing these kind of elements around your reliability and resiliency is then you will have more proactive observability and response, right? You will have the ability to look ahead, be more proactive, and meet your SLOs and SLAs, right? The other is around encouraging automation over rework. This takes time. It's easier said than done. We tend to, you may want to automate everything, but then that falls into the, rework over and over again. It's good to create automation that are based on patterns, so that then you can teach people how to use it, enable the discovery, and then enable the use, so that then you can fix whatever you need to fix. And then you have the idea of finding and fixing flaws before release. So the idea of site reliability through observability is to be proactive in those things. There are things that are coming up like AI ops and auto remediation, which are also touch a little bit on this topic that we had earlier around AI. We have some scenarios where we have seen like how do you identify issues with your builds, with your tests, or with your deploys, and how do you enable things like ChatGPT or other sources to provide feedback, immediate feedback and recommendations, whether it is to do an auto remediation or do a guided remediation, or even to provide steps so that you can do either manual remediation where necessary. The other benefit about is these communications, because it enables collaboration across teams to stay abreast of what's going on with your release. And last but not least is the idea of having participation from multiple departments, not just IT, but looking at from the FinOps perspective, or what happened really with the delivery at the client level, right? Customer satisfaction, and also internally developer experience. So those, I think, are some of the benefits that we can derive out of implementing these concepts of reliability and resiliency.
And I think what's great is what we have found, everything Christopher and Eddy, you just shared on the Deloitte perspective is exactly what has shined through this year's research. Culture, it really is the foundation. And I think, we've seen that those teams that have generative culture, that the people on those teams, they felt included and they belong to their team, they have 30% higher organizational performance. But sometimes I think when we say culture, what is culture? What does this mean? And I think I love that we kind of dug into this a little bit further, looking at the generative culture, your organization stability, your job security. I mean, I know this year that has definitely been top of mind for a lot of people. Your flexibility, where you work, when you work, how you work, knowledge sharing, how easy it is, how does information flow within your system in the team, that user centrism, that ability to understand the value you're bringing to the business through that value you're bringing to the user, and then how work is distributed. That, we definitely found that equitable work distribution really has an impact on team and organizational performance. And then next slide, digging deeper into, I've been using the word user and user centrism a lot. And that's because it just shined in this year's report. It touched in every aspect of what we were looking at. It came through that those teams that are focused on the user are just having better outcomes. And when I say, the user looking, that a user-centric application, specifically what we mean by that is their team has a clear understanding of what users want to accomplish. Their team's success is evaluated according to the value they provide to their organization and to the users of their application. And specifications, so like requirements planning, are continually revisited and prioritized according to those user signals. And so teams that have that in place, that there's a culture of that within, whether it's just their team or the organization, are definitely finding better outcomes, not just for themselves on the team level, but for their users and for the organization. And one of the things, we see with this is what makes that possible from a leadership perspective, how leaders play a role in this is really about incentives. And, Eddy, you were sharing about, one of the things with the reliability practice is it's bringing everyone together. It's that cross communication. It's sharing, this path of how we bring value to the users. And I think leaders, sometimes we accidentally, one team will be compensated by one thing, another will be for something else, and they're in conflict of each other, and that kind of limits our ability to improve and get better. The other, thing we see, and I saw this, in the Deloitte perspective as well, is about documentation. Internal documentation has such a high impact on our team's ability to be successful. And what was interesting, what we saw come out of this year, was that its impact when we have quality documentation in place, how it helps us improve and implement and do better at these capabilities that we know improve software delivery. So, really specifically looking at that trunk-based development, those teams that have high quality internal documentation around that, they're doing better at trunk-based development. Same with continuous integration and continuous delivery. We use the word cloud. We're talking about really flexible infrastructure and being able to leverage the characteristics of that. And over the last several years, we've seen teams, move to the cloud, but they really weren't taking advantage of flexible infrastructure. And, by that, that's on-demand self-service, broad network access, being able to resource pool, have that rapid elasticity, and have it really be kind of a measured service. And the teams that are just using the cloud, we saw that really is having a neutral or negative impact on their software delivery. And, possibly some of that comes down to that when you're moving to use the cloud, that's a new environment, you've got new tools, and you're really taking on a lot of extra cognitive load. And to do that, it represents that you've got to learn a new way of doing things. And if it's just kind of replacing doing it the same way you were doing it before, but now you're doing it in the cloud, we don't see the value there. But when we're implementing it in a flexible infrastructure way, we're using that, that on-demand service. I love to learn new things. Engineers love to learn new things. They want to explore and find, new paths to do things. And if I can easily get resources and do that, I'm more apt to do that. But if I get an idea and I want to try something and experiment, and it takes 6 weeks to get the environment set up, I'm a lot less likely to be successful or even explore that when I do have a few extra cycles on hand. And so we know that engineers are happier when their organization is succeeding, and that those teams that have the ability to access flexible infrastructure are having better organizational performance. As you see here on the slide, 30% better. And then the last thing that I think is really important that we dug into this year was how, our work and how delivering software impacts underrepresented groups. And when what we were looking at is people that identify as underrepresented and women, and those who choose to self-describe their gender as that they've got higher levels of burnout. And I think that there's probably multiple reasons for this. There's some systemic things, there's environmental reasons, but as we looked at the data and started to combine and dig in, some things that we saw was that one aspect when we talk about documentation and that quality documentation is that the teams that have higher quality documentation, right, they have better overall organizational performance, but that didn't always improve or impact and help these underrepresented groups. And some of that could be because underrepresented and women tend to take on, more kind of repetitive work, and they might be writing more of that documentation. And so we saw that in these groups, they tend to take on more of the unplanned work. And unfortunately, the work that they're taking on sometimes isn't visible to our peers, or it's really just not directly aligned to what they're getting reviewed for their professional skill set. And so it is important as we are looking at our teams that we're thinking about how do we distribute work fairly? How do we make sure that that those members that might kind of tend to do more repetitive work and take on those tasks that are really more toil, that we're making sure we're distributing that among our team so that we can all get better together. And Christopher, I'll pass it back to you.
Hi, so I want to be conscious of everybody's time, so if I go quickly, I apologize. Culture. Culture is the foundation for how organizations succeed or fail. An organization that recognizes the individual and aligns the individual with goals is going to see better performance, and is going to realize a happier employee. Leading with cloud, strong organization equals leading. Those organizations tend to lead in culture. They're progressive. The common theme is organizations that are experimental, that are trying new things, as I discussed earlier, in a graduated manner. That culture tends to result in a better outcome and happier employees. Eddy, do you want to talk about user centricity, or is that me?
Yes, quickly. So user centricity within the context of DevOps usually refers to the practice of really prioritizing the end user's needs, experiences, and feedback through the entire software development lifecycle, which includes development, testing, deployment, and operations, right? So in traditional software development, process and developers and operations may work on silos, and sometimes they are detached from users. So in DevOps is really the intent of emphasizing collaboration and communication between developers and operators. And user centricity is fundamental for this collaboration. Here you can see a picture that provides a couple of ideas on how do you enable that user centricity. Back to you, Christopher, on documentation.
So we talked about documentation. It's important, but there's also bad documentation. Documentation needs to be easy to use, portable, and expandable. I like to have a rule of thumb. For every 2 paragraphs that I read, I should draw some conclusion that applies to what I'm looking at. And for goodness sake, training. Training doesn't have to be a large expenditure, but putting in the time to making sure that as we're evolving technology, as we're introducing new capabilities, we have the documentation, and then we couple that with training. Eddy, infrastructure?
Yeah, infrastructure. That's another topic that we see constantly. People trying to use smarter their infrastructure. That is in multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and even regular cloud for achieving these goals. We actually see also this as an excellent entry point for AI as an FYI. And there are a lot of offerings out there that we have seen that are using this AI component to accelerate to build smarter infrastructure. So you can see here about 70% of executives are expecting to be hybrid in the next 10 years. And I will say that, not for this because we're running out of time, but there is a concept of hybrid by default, which is where most people have gone, right? They started with one cloud, they go another cloud for another reason, and they end up having cloud sprawling all over. But there is this idea of having, hybrid by design, which then enables the utilization of resources in a better manner. And within Deloitte, we have created paths to achieve that sort of goals.
And lastly, underrepresented groups. However we define that, there is one thing that's necessary. So I'm one of the leaders at Deloitte for our Helix group. So it's Hispanic and Latinx folks. I focus on mentorship. We focus heavily on creating a sense of belonging, not to the exclusion, but to the inclusion of everyone. A lot of it is understanding. And then creating development opportunities for emerging leaders, not giving a leg up, but recognizing within groups that there are people that may have a different way of expressing themselves, and finding those people, those leaders, and providing avenues for them to promote. We focus on that heavily at Deloitte.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda, Christopher, and Eddy. All right, so we do have a few minutes for Q&A, and unfortunately we're a little bit behind schedule, so I think we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. There was some great questions submitted in our Q&A feature, so I'm going to combine 2 questions that I think are related, and I'll just throw this out to the group, and we can kind of figure out who answers this. So I think with the findings around user centricity, how do teams adequately prioritize those non-functional requirements like DevOps, infrastructure, things that may not be immediately user-centric, but are very important for organizational success?
I'll take a swing at that. So the best agile teams have functional first stories. Functional first. And when you're functional first, it's very easy to, I say easy, with the right skill set, to understand the architectural runway. When you have the architectural runway, you break the architecture of deployments into the smallest segments possible to deploy, and you wrap that up in each end of sprint and in each release. When we start to get into continuous release, the connection becomes tighter and tighter. DevOps is the accelerator. So DevOps is a natural piece of technical debt in the beginning. And then on its own, once the footprint is instantiated, teams recognize the evolutions of DevOps to make them go faster and faster. The best teams self-realize the balance, but it all starts with functional first stories with really, really, really good written acceptance criteria. That will drive everything else. And then lastly, reserving a certain percentage of every sprint, if you're not agile, every iteration, for a certain amount of technical debt so that it doesn't get too big.
And if I can just pile on, one thing is that I think when we think user, we're always thinking that end user, and oftentimes we are talking about that, but especially because you mentioned kind of infrastructure and DevOps teams, if I'm on a platform engineering team, my user are the developers within our organization, and I should be thinking about how what I'm bringing to them, what that's giving to the value to the developer, and then the developer is going to bring better value to the end user. And so sometimes the direct user of the work we're doing might be an internal user, but we should really be making sure that we're keeping that line of communication open, and we're not building something and expecting them to come, that we're really ensuring that we're bringing increment value even to our internal users.
All right, to quickly close, just a little bit more about Deloitte's global Agile and DevOps practice. Everyone here today is based in the US, but we are truly a global practice with over close to 40,000 Agile practitioners around the world. We take our certifications very seriously, so there's a lot of Agile and DevOps certified folks, and there's lots of opportunities to engage with us. I know that there were some questions that we weren't able to answer, and so we'd love for you all to connect with us. Here's quickly flashing this up, but here are our personal emails. We'd love for you all to engage with us, connect with us on LinkedIn, and we can continue to answer your questions and engage with you all. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining and participating. Thank you, Amanda, Christopher, and Eddy for leading the conversation, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.